customers. So I, literally brought our CEOs together and said, okay, let's figure out how we can help our customers. And, it was interesting with Finastra in particular. We started to really analyze the communities that were being hit hardest, and it became very clear that a number of those communities actually don't have large branch banks supporting, call it the financial access to the businesses in those communities. And I think these statistics. Nearly 70% of Black neighborhoods don't have a branch bank at all. And when I start to reflect upon my childhood, 40 plus years ago, and remembering that in our neighborhood, which had, businesses that were African-American owned, et cetera, there were no banks. And in fact, my parents had to go across town to go to a bank and ultimately a credit union because they were teachers. That made all the difference in our family's ability to, to buy a house, to finance a car, and to do the things to move through the economic opportunity that is America. And, that stark realization that these communities don't have banks, led me to have a number of conversations with our team at Finastra, my internal team. And we said, listen, here's what the challenge is. So, I had some relationships in Washington, that, as Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin and others. And I started making calls and saying, look, this is the problem. And how do we address this problem? And Kenneth Kelly, who was president of the National Bank Association, and he and Donna Gumbrell and Bill Bynum, really started literally having calls every day and then every other day, figuring out a plan to help the communities that they serve, the community that I come from. And we realized that the most effective way to actually drive capital and help these communities is going to be through what we term the capillary banking systems, the CDFIs and MDIs, because they actually know the customers. They're in the neighborhoods. They have the contact. They are actually the principal providers of economic capital into those communities. But we realized many of them didn't necessarily have the modernization capacity in their infrastructure, even though they had the wherewithal and the knowledge. And so that was, and then of course the capital. So that created a whole, in my mind, project that we now had to go handle. And the good news is, we've been able to get a number of allies, inclusive being one of those allies, to really work in, the federal government legislature, the executive branch, to, working with the technology providers, Finastra and Microsoft and others, to say, let's bring some real solutions here. Let's work as a team to make America a better and more inclusive place for access to capital. And while our work is nowhere near done, but I see, tremendous momentum from where we were a year and a half ago. And in fact, I'm seeing an acceleration of that momentum and real activities occurring in implementation. And that's what gives me some confidence and optimism that we're going to get this work done and get it done the right way.
It's so exciting to hear you talk about the capillary banking system. And really, I think as you describe, the last 18 months where it's almost like the fissures in our banking system kind of cracked wide open, and it became so clear, what some have seen and felt for so long, which is, the larger kind of arterial banks simply cannot and don't and can't sometimes reach communities of color, lower income communities, and other communities that have just never had access. So many of our network members, so many of our community development credit unions actually organized the credit union out of either anti-redlining efforts in the 70s, or as the banks were consolidating in the 80s and 90s and moving branches out, they were organizing to keep those branches open, but then convert them into credit unions. And so, you're really, I think, it's really music to the ears of so many of our members.